tax now with Denise, as new figures from HMRC show that families paid a record £8.5 billion in the last tax year.
I mean, £8.5 billion, Denise, that is staggering. What's behind the rise?
It is a lot, isn't it? And it is rising, that's the point. It's to do with the nil rate band, which is the threshold at which people start being eligible to pay inheritance tax. And that hasn't changed since 2009. So we're talking about 17 years. What that means in practical terms is that even though inflation has risen, even though property prices have risen, you can imagine over 17 years, with that band staying the same, more and more people are joining into that level where they start to be eligible to pay inheritance tax, or estates, I should say, not people. Their estates become into that band. And that's why that number is rising. It's estimated about 5% of all estates end up paying inheritance tax at the moment. But that number has been rising year on year over the last 5 years. And so with that ban staying put, this is becoming relevant to more people. And it's why I wanted to talk about it today. It's one of those things where you think it doesn't apply to you, but over time it might. And what it requires is a conversation. Now, I love to say, let's just talk about these things. This can be a nice trigger moment to say, oh, this is going up. I wonder if that would matter to us. What's our estate like? What would happen if I pass, you pass? Have that little conversation and get our affairs in order. So that's what this is about.
As you know, I've been dealing with probate after losing Dad last summer. It is so much to get your head around. And for anyone else going through the same thing, there's a lot, and you sort of doubt yourself loads, don't you? We're going to do this in the style of the frequently asked questions about inheritance tax. Where do you begin?
Well, to start with, what is it and who has to pay it? Because not everyone knows. So the beginning is that it's a tax on the estate of the person who's passed, and it's paid by the executors when they're organising, paying out everything from that estate. So mostly they will sort all of that out before they give anything to beneficiaries. So it shouldn't be something the beneficiaries have to do, but if you're the executor, you have to deal with it. Now, if your estate is valued at more than £325,000, that's when you can see here, it starts to move into the tax being due and payable. And when it is, it's at that 40% rate, which is why it's significant. So anything below £325,000, no tax to pay. That's the nil rate band I was talking about. But it includes your property, which is going to be one of your most valuable things, all possessions and money. And it's that total that you have to look at. So it is important to have your affairs in order, have a will, put a will in place. Not just because a will is important, but also the process of putting a will in place means you have a conversation, you think about your assets and where you want them to go. It just gives you a bit of peace of mind and a forethought about whether this tax will be payable.
I think it's one of those things, isn't it, when you have the conversation that really helps kind of, because it's not easy. It's not easy having this conversation, obviously depending on your family members and that sort of thing. We don't like to talk about it. And when it comes down to the details about this, we talk about the estate, as you mentioned. What about properties? Is that all wrapped up in that? Because some people don't realise that. Yeah, well, property is one of the main assets that many people own. And yes, that does become part of the estate. The good thing with property is that for many people, it's not necessarily going to end up something that you have to pay the tax on. Because as I said, first of all, you've got that £325,000. So if your property is valued at less than that, no tax to pay. And then you also, in addition, get what we call the residence allowance. So if you leave your property to a child or your grandchildren, so your child or your grandchildren, so that kind of line of descent, you get an additional £175,000, you can see here, which means you can have a property up to the total value of £500,000 and not have to pay any inheritance tax. But you have to have followed that sequence, hence back to the planning, thinking about who you're leaving things to and why, because that's when you will get that full benefit of the £500,000. That the valuation isn't really, it's the most important when the person's passed, but you don't want to do anything where you're undervaluing a property because it has to be the true value at that point. You can't kind of escape this tax.
Yeah. You must get asked a lot about this, sort of the gifting of money and sort of giving money away before you die. That's quite confusing, isn't it?
It can be. And again, this is something that's more and more relevant. If you have got some assets as you get older, you want to start giving them away, helping out family and friends. tax can be paid. That will be included as part of your estate, I think, is the main thing to know. So anything you give away within 7 years before you pass could potentially be part of your estate. And then if your value of all of that is more than £325,000, it could be liable to tax. However, within that 7 years, as you can see there, you don't have to pay the full amount of tax on that amount. So it depends on that point in the 7-year line. So you can see there, if you pass within the first 3 years, the full 40%, but the closer you get to 7 years since you gave that gift, the less tax is due, and then 7 years or more, no tax due. So it's something to be, don't worry about the technicalities. What I want you to remember is that there is a timeline of 7 years. The amount of tax gets less over time. And the way to know what you're doing is to keep records. So if you are giving lump sums away, if you are giving something to children, just keep a record of it so everyone knows what was given, because they will have to deal with that later on.
Yeah, it's effectively tapering. You can almost just see it there. It is so confusing though. And it's such it's so grim, talking about the 7 years to your death going to happen.
And I think don't think about it that way. Think about it as a little bit of life admin, home hygiene, and just knowing about what things you're doing.
Home hygiene, right?
Yes.
That's a good one. Now, look, if you are married in a relationship, this is an interesting point.
Yeah.
Do you still have to pay inheritance tax?
That's the other big one. And the answer is, if you pass everything to your spouse or your civil partner, then no. There is no inheritance tax paid when it passes. Everything passes to them or whatever you pass to them. However, that's only if you're married or in a civil partnership. So you have to be wary if you're cohabiting. Doesn't matter if you've lived together forever and you've got children together. This tax benefit would not apply. So it's another thing to be aware of, only if you're married or in a civil partnership. Now, if you are married, you also, not only do you get to pass things over, any unused allowance can also pass over to your spouse. So that graph we showed you before with that graphic with the 325,000 up to 500,000 value in your property could get doubled if you pass it over to your spouse, and so it could end up with £1 million worth of exemption to the IHT. So there's a lot to consider. I don't want you to get bamboozled by figures and dates. What I want you to take away from this is that the threshold is right. The number of people that are falling into this is rising. And so it's worth all of us just having a conversation, thinking about it, getting a will written, and just getting some advice, having that conversation at home so you feel aware.
I always think that, my parents are teachers, have worked hard all their lives, and you want to make sure they want to pass something on to the grandchildren. You want to make sure the money goes to you.
And it's that thing, even if you've done it, even if you're super diligent, just every few years having a check-in and keeping it up to date. That's the other thing. Just things change, life circumstances change. We can just do our best to keep on top of it.